Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Colby Covington of It's Been a Year, Better Come Back and Do My Job Again. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you for the last UFC event of the year. They wrapped it up, and thank goodness, Cub Swanson and Joaquin Buckley said, let's finish this on a high note. Couple of very impressive performances, one from an old boy and one beating up an old boy, and some other fun stuff happened on this card too. It wasn't bad. It was... it wasn't amazing, but it wasn't bad. It was pretty good. There wasn't an awful lot else going on this weekend. I skipped the K1 Grand Prix because it was all the fat boys. It wasn't like K1 Grand Prix, the lighter weights. It was K1 Grand Prix cruiserweight or heavyweight or something like that. One of those divisions that hasn't been serious in kickboxing since the late 2000s. But unfortunately, it meant that I missed Claudio Estrada get his third hilarious non-finish in a row. This dude... His fights in 2024. He retired due to leaving the ring in June. That was in the quarterfinals of the tournament. For some reason, they still invited him back. In October, he had a no contest due to hitting the dude in the back of the head too much. And then last night, he just got disqualified for repeatedly hitting the back of the head again. What a clown. But definitely look him up. It's a very funny watch. Heavyweight kickboxing, it's just arse. It's Rico Verhoeven and no one. And that's not because Rico Verhoeven's so good, that's because there's just no talent there. Which is incredibly tragic when you remember back to like the golden era of K1, when heavyweight was just full of guys like Ernesto Hoost, Peter Ayats, Sammy Schilt, Andy Hug. Even the mid-tier guys like Mike Bernardo and Francisco Filio were really good. But anyway, enough about kickboxing. Let's talk about MMA because we had a good event. Main event, Colby Covington, back at short notice. Really weird. He's so... If he hasn't carefully picked his matchups, his career has been so strange just by luck that, it is so strange to see him come back into possibly the most dangerous fight of his career. Because if you revisit Colby's career, which I did last week, Joaquin Buckley, aside from the title fights, Joaquin Buckley is the best fighter he's met at a good point in their career. I mean, Tyron Woodley was at one point a very, very good fighter. Rafael Dos Anjos was at one point a very, very good fighter. Same with Damian Maia. Same with Robbie Lawler. But he met all of them, not just at like the start of their decline, but when they were very obviously already in it. He fought Kamaru Usman, and then he took like 2 years where he just fought Tyron Woodley coming off 2 losses, handed him his third loss on the trot, and they went, have another title shot. So he's had the strangest career. I was trying to look at like the best fighter he met at a good point in their career, and you might have to go back to like 2016 Max Griffin. Barberena was never anything special. Dong Hyun Kim was already past his best when Colby met him, and that's one of his like stronger wins. And then there's the ghost of Damian Maia, the ghost of Rafael Dos Anjos, the ghost of Robbie Lawler, and they gave him a belt for beating Dos Anjos, a lightweight who's 40-something years old. Though granted, this was 6 years ago. So all of that being said, it was very strange to watch him, having sort of weighted his way into these big pay-per-view title shots, come back at short notice against a dangerous opponent. I suspect the writing was sort of on the wall for him because, he did pivot hard into the Trump gimmick, partly because, and also just being noisy generally, because even when he was winning fights, there was rumours of cutting him just because he's boring. He's spoken about this himself, but watching him come out with Hulk Hogan and Chael Sonnen in an attempt to let them use their charisma to get him over was very weird. I think because we're headed into like another Trump administration, being the Trump fighter is not really a thing that's sustainable. So that gimmick was sort of on his last legs, and also he's just getting older as a fighter. Aaron Bronstetter on Twitter pointed out that Buckley's had a big year in terms of big name wins. He fought, and also just a big year generally. Who fights 4 times a year in the UFC? Nobody. It's hard enough to get 3 fights in a year. That's pretty rare, even though they claim everyone does. That used to be Dana's thing. It was like the best fight the best 3 times a year, and you just don't hear him say it anymore because because there aren't enough people fighting 3 times a year. There's only like a couple, and they're all undercard guys normally who need the money. But Buckley has been an absolute workhorse. He fought Vicente Luque back in March, Nursultan Ruziboev, the massive Uzbekistani, in May, Stephen Thompson in October, and then Colby Covington in December. That's about as many fights as you can get in a year, particularly at this level. Because once you get to this level, you don't want to be taking too many fights and wearing yourself down. They're taking an awful lot out of you, and the camp's taking it out of you. You're also making some money now, so there is no impetus to like fight injured and do something stupid, especially if you're on a winning streak. So mad respect for Buckley to put together such activity while also climbing the rankings and also getting all these wins together. He has, as someone pointed out, sort of done the Colby Covington to Colby Covington, because Vicente Luque, Stephen Thompson, and Colby Covington are thoroughly washed fighters. Vicente Luque's not even old. Luque, whatever his name is. He's like 33, but in terms of wear and tear, because he was an offensive counterpuncher. He goes forward trying to slip your punches and hit you in the head with big bombs. He gets hit an awful lot, even in good fights typically, except that one the other day where he like one-punched him and then anaconda'd him, which was incredible. But he's a very shot-born fighter. And in addition to that, he's had like a brain bleed, and they're still letting him fight, which is crazy. But Stephen Thompson, obviously washed now. If you haven't seen... Someone called me a casual for pointing this out, like that Stephen Thompson's washed, but if you've not seen him in his prime, you wouldn't know. But like watching him now, it's so obvious how slow he is. This guy used to be hard to get to the cage. Now he like backs up and immediately is on it. It's not that he's met 6 great ring cutters in a row. It's that he just hits the fence really easy nowadays. He's not as fast as he used to be. He's not as quick on his feet. If you watch that fight, I was talking about this in the Buckley fight, but if you watch the Buckley fight, he's trying to sell out on counter shots and then just standing there for punches afterwards. So he slides back a bit, Buckley's coming forward. He lands the right hand and then he just stands there and gets clobbered with a left hook afterwards. All the speed is gone from that man. But this is the nature of welterweight. You are going to have to beat up some old men because they're still ranking the old men. This fight, I thought Buckley looked good. I'm still so used in my mind to seeing Buckley versus Imavov just running, or Holland, just running in on a straight line, falling short, not being able to turn, running straight past the guy if he takes a step to the left or the right, like that Aikido guy on Joe Rogan used to say you could do. And now his boxing's actually pretty good. I thought his boxing in particular to answer Colby Covington was interesting. Covington's obviously a southpaw. He's had a lot of success against orthodox fighters throwing the left high kick and then level changing, or the left overhand and then level changing. Against Buckley, he was trying to put his head outside the lead leg, because they're both southpaws, and duck in on the double leg. And Buckley would keep popping him with like a jab or a half-hearted 1-2 to load up the lead uppercut. And he was landing it loads throughout the fight, and sometimes he'd land it and then come up with the right uppercut, his lead-handed uppercut. And sometimes he'd come up with the right hook afterwards, which was nice. But, it's always weird in fights, cuts, because in Muay Thai, you obviously aim for cuts, and a really good elbow is going to open up a big cut. But when you're punching things, it's often like the worst punches produce the big cuts, and then the process of punching them properly through the next 2 rounds or whatever opens up the cut worse. So if you watch the punch that they isolated, thinking that it cut Colby open, he gets like scraped across the eye. The punch moves across his face and doesn't really like put any stank on him, but it cuts his eye open, and it was just under the eyebrow, which is the one where you're almost definitely in danger of the referee stopping the fight. The only one I can think of recently is like Khalil Roundtree got a big cut underneath his eyebrow, and they just sort of let him go in the Pereira fight. But if the blood's going in your eye, that's supposed to be what triggers the stoppage of the fight by the doctor. That can happen if you get a big cut above your eyebrow. That can happen with a big cut in your eyebrow. But typically, the shape of your eye and your eyebrow means that if you get cut on the forehead or whatever, it's going to run down the outside of your eye. If you get cut underneath the eyebrow, there's basically nowhere the blood's going except in your eye. So once that's open, it's like I said, I mentioned Muay Thai earlier, but if someone gets cut, they would like point at it to show the ref that the opponent's been cut. They'll go, "Oh, he's cut," and then they're just gonna do everything they can to make that the stoppage. If you watch in MMA, some of the wrestlers in this sport's history have taken people down and then just rubbed their hand across the cut on the mat. If you watch Chad Mendes versus Conor McGregor, he sticks his fingers in the cut. If you watch Ricardo Arona versus Sakuraba, sticks his fingers in the cut. It's illegal to stick your fingers in the cut, but if you're rubbing your head in the guy's face and that's stretching the cut open, that's legal. If you're rubbing your hand across his face and it stretches it open, that's also. It's a hard sport because once you get cut, basically there's nothing. You can stop a guy from punching you. You can try and stay away from punches, but you can't stop a guy from rubbing on you in the clinch and so on. So cuts in MMA do get worse almost without exception. It's very hard to protect a cut, especially if it happens this early. And unfortunately for Colby Covington, Buckley was also clubbing him with punches throughout this whole fight. Buckley was never rated much as a grappler. He was always a bit of a banger, and he sort of fell short in the technical striking as well. But in this fight, Colby Covington would change levels onto his hips, and Buckley would just slam his hips forward into Covington, and Covington would fall on his ass. And that's really impressive to stop an NCAA Division I wrestler of a similar weight to you by hitting him with your hips and putting him backwards. There was one where Colby ended up pulling half guard underneath him, and I went, "Oh dear! If this is round 2. If you aren't able to run through him in round 2, you're probably maybe he gets tired by round 4, but it's not looking good for you." So Buckley gets the stoppage round 3. I think Colby Covington did himself some favours here because he can do the whole robbery thing. There were people online saying pulling up loads of different cuts, including that Khalil Roundtree one, saying, "What's the difference? Why was Colby's fight stopped?" And I mean, the difference was competent doctor working. If you remember, it might have been the Khalil Roundtree one. There was one this year where the doctor wouldn't say to stop the fight, and the referee, I think it might have been Goddard, but he ended up losing his patience with the doctor and saying, "You're telling me whether we stop this fight or not. I have called you in to tell me if it's safe to continue." And the doctor kept going "Oh, I don't know, it's up to you." Trying to get out of being blamed for stopping a fight. It's like how refs will not do anything in a big fight. If they feel like it's a big occasion and you start cheating, they're going to do everything they can to not involve themselves for risk of being murdered by either gamblers or rabid fans. But yeah, Colby had actually just gotten on top and was doing some decent work for the first time in the fight when the fight was waved off. So unfortunate for him, but that's the nature of the fight. He knew he was cut from round 1. He was going after it. He didn't get any success until round 3. And the cut was only going to get worse because he wasn't getting away from punches at all. Was pretty impressed by how it was a weird sort of physical matchup because Colby's always been small for a welterweight. And Buckley looked more muscled, and he's got those huge legs, but I don't think he looked huge. So this dude was fighting up at middleweight a while ago, and he was just dwarfed by everyone he fought. And obviously he's undefeated since he came down to welterweight, so definitely the right career move. And now he's probably in, what is he, top 5 now, probably after this? Seems like at welterweight you have to execute a couple of old men, and then you get into that area of the division, like Shavkat, Gary, Edwards, obviously Bilal's the champion. But those are the guys we all want to see fight each other. And after the fight, Hakeem Buckley managed to line up a fight with Kamaru Usman, another aging figure in the division. But then, to be fair, Usman's coming off quite a decent performance against Khamzat Chimaev. The only decent performance against Khamzat Chimaev aside from Gilbert Burns. But it was very funny hearing him offer names to the crowd. And then I feel like the crowd cheered equally for all of them. And he went, "I think Kamaru Usman is the one the crowd want to hear. That the crowd want to see." Co-main, Cub Swanson. Love that man. If you didn't know that I love Cub Swanson, I've loved Cub Swanson since the first time I laid eyes on him in WEC. Actually, I think the first time I laid eyes on him might have been when Jose Aldo kneed him in the head in 10 seconds in WEC. But very quickly in WEC, I decided that Cub Swanson was my guy. And I haven't actually written a lot on him, or I didn't write a lot on him when I was at Fightland or Bleacher Report or wherever. So this week I decided to write something about him. Focused on this interesting get-up, this guillotine get-up double attack that he's been doing since WEC. Did it to everyone from Dustin Poirier to Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira takes you down and you immediately get up with this. It's a legit technique. But obviously in recent years he hasn't been doing an awful lot of fighting on the ground. But yeah, he's been looking decent. I'd say he beat Dawodu after that loss to Martinez where he just got his leg kicked apart. And then he had the split decision loss to Andre Fili, where I thought he might have done enough to win. But fought Billy Quarantillo. I think Billy's 8 years younger than him, even though Billy's kind of like an old man in this division because the lighter weight divisions move so fast. Good old Cub Swanson looking for the big right hand, hands down by his chest from early on, makes it harder to see things coming like that. Pairing the calf kick with the right hand very well, sort of similar to the stuff we talked about in my Jotin article. Jotin does a lot of faking with his right hip. He'll lead with the right low kick immediately to get guys checking, because that's a naked technique. You're saying you should be able to block that, and if you're not going to block it, I'm going to kick it. And so they start picking up their leg, and as they're picking up their leg, that's time that you can move in and hit them. So you start faking with your hips and then throwing the right hand. And Jotin does it with quite a long right straight, but Cub was doing it like right overhand off his chest, throwing his head well forward. But he's throwing big power on it. Worked terrifically. He was doing a lot of leading with the right hand and then coming with the jab afterwards, and that seemed to be bothering Quarantillo as well. Will say he got hit a lot when he hung around. He was doing great landing big bombs from distance, and then he'd bite off a bit more than he should, and Billy Q would hit him on the return, normally with the left hook. There was a beautiful moment where Cub got sort of stunned, and he's running backwards, and Billy Q is a volume guy and a pace guy, so getting in that sort of position could have been very bad. But he's heading backwards, like trying to cover up, and he just kicks out Billy Q's leg as Billy's throwing, knocks him completely off balance, and basically cuts off the exchange, which I thought was brilliant. Could have been a little foot sweep, could have been just like a kick at the ankle, an ankle tap, but it worked fantastically. When Billy Q got the takedown, there was a cool bit of octopus guard back and forward. Cub got underneath his armpit and started to threaten to come up on his back, and Billy Q sort of sat there going, which way do I move to not let him come up on my back? And they ended up scrambling out to the feet. But they did get into sort of a rut, and I think it's the same sort of thing that happened with Billy Q against Edson Barboza. He started putting the volume on Cub, so he'd be going jab, 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 and he was confidently putting these jabs out there, and you can see this in the last round. Go have a watch of that, because he just gets into the rhythm of just putting out the jab. And when you start doing that and you're not doing things in between, not moving around, not slipping, not faking, jab level change, jab right hand, you're not throwing anything after. They don't have any reason to, because the jab is the punch that you're going to see the most, and you're going to train to counter the most. So the moment that a guy gets into a rhythm throwing just the jab, he's teeing up counters. And Cub Swanson throws the right hand across the top, and that sort of shelled Billy up. And then Cub jumped in with the left hook right straight and knocked him down. It was very similar to Ilia Topuria versus Jai Herbert. If you've seen that fight in the second round, Topuria times a right hand across the top of Herbert's jab, just like Cub did here. And Herbert, who's been doing very well and probably winning most of the exchanges in the fight, suddenly stops throwing and starts backing up towards the cage. And he doesn't do it in like a panicked way where all the crowd go, oh, he's hurt, and Joe Rogan shouts he's hurt. He did it in like an experienced fighter way. But it's a very obvious change of behavior. If you've been throwing confidently and then you stop for a moment and start backing up, good fighters notice that. And Topuria moved in and just chinned him along the fence. Like that was when Topuria moved in and threw, I think, 4 or 5 punches in a row just along the fence, because he saw that Herbert wasn't going to keep him off him. Herbert was shelling up. And the same thing happened here. Right hand across the top of the jab. The guy goes quiet, radio silent, and you just throw power punches at him because he's probably hurt. So Cub gets a walk-off knockout for possibly his retirement fight. Cool guy move. Get your wife in the cage and then say, I might retire because my wife's been telling me to, so that the whole arena boos your wife. But yeah, he seemed happy, and it was really nice. And I like the sort of terms he laid out. Someone asked him in the post-fight presser, is it really your retirement? Because he's been sort of back and forth on it. He didn't commit before the fight. He didn't really commit after the fight, to this being his last fight. But he said he would do one more fight if he could get the Doo Ho Choi fight. Which, he's on a 2-fight winning streak over decent featherweights now. Doo Ho Choi did look absolutely electric last week. If you didn't listen to my podcast last week, it was basically just the Doo Ho Choi love hour. But Choi's on a 2-fight winning streak as well. Draw over Kyle Nelson, and that's all he's really done since he came back from military service. So while one did look a lot better than the other, it's not a completely nonsense fight, and it does have that history, and it's something that Cub's asking for as a pretty decent way to send him off, because the UFC is typically so dreadful at the last fights for great fighters. I think they were talking about who they just matched Jose Aldo against. Oh, Daniel Marcos won the split decision and called out Jose Aldo. Another fight that makes no sense for Aldo. Joel Alvarez called out Donald Cerrone, who's been retired for like 4 years. It's like when Frankie Edgar ended up getting knocked out by Chris Gutierrez, who no one even remembers now, when they could have done Edgar versus Cruz, which everyone would have loved. Manel Kape actually let his hands go, and I said it on the boycast, but I was like, him winning impressively here would actually make me dislike him even more for all the times he hasn't let his hands go. But being a Manel Kape fan is a pretty punishing experience because you constantly have to go, well, he just didn't show up. So it's nice that they get one in the tank because he looked really good here against Bruno Silva. He was lumping him up. Lots of double hand checking from both in this fight. I liked when Kape was stepping back to southpaw from orthodox and then hammering Silva with the left straight as he stepped in. There was some nice stuff where he was switching stances mid-combination. He just looked really fast. And I think, obviously it's helped along by not having to worry that much about the grappling. It's helped along by the fact that Bruno Silva is, even in this smallest weight class, he's very small. They're billed at 5'5" and 5'4", but, if you watch the fight, it looked like Kape was considerably bigger. But Bruno Silva's no slouch, and he's a finisher in his own right, so it's not like Kape was just walking through the punches of some pillow-fisted softy. Yeah, somehow in losing that questionable decision to Mohamed Mokaev, he's ended up in a better position than Mokaev at the end of the year. Mokaev just fought a 10-5 guy on the regionals. Oh, I forgot to mention how mad the reffing was throughout this event. Keith Peterson, something about the Ozempic has just wrecked his brain. A couple of weeks ago, he was doing a terrible... What was that fight he was doing terribly in a couple of weeks ago? I'll remember it when I'm done recording. But he had a couple on this card where he was just like ignoring fouls. Daniel Marcos versus Yanez. Low kick to the groin and an eye poke in the same sequence. Yanez takes like 3 minutes to recover. And then Keith Peterson, Michael Bisping and Paul Felder are talking about how the referees don't stand for that anymore. They'll start taking points. As Keith Peterson's going, oh, come on now. This is a firm warning. Back to action. Peterson let Bruno Silva kick Kape in the junk 3 times, and then he let Kape finish with a kick to the groin at the end of the fight. It was a kick to the groin and then punches that followed to finish. And the commentators have to do their best to like obscure that. They have to go, well, he might have hit him in the cup first, but it rode up and hit him in the body. It's crazy stuff. William Gomez this year, it was this year, yeah. He won a fight by kicking the guy in the groin and the referee just going, oh, sorry, got that wrong, but it's a TKO now. Anything else good? Vitor Petrino versus Dustin Jacoby was ho-hum, but the knockout was sensational. They were sort of staring at each other. Well, Petrino tried a flying knee and then they just sort of stared at each other. And Jacoby was going to throw something. And Vitor Petrino was going to throw a big counter. So Jacoby throws a big right hand down the centre. And Petrino loads up this big left swing. And the right hand gets there first. And he ends up doing the big spin around left hook, falling like Masvidal did versus Usman. There's been a few of those. I'm trying to think of another one. Overeem versus Harry 2. I don't know if he got the knockout, but that was a big knockdown in that fight. If you can sneak the right hand down the inside of a left hook, that's an incredible punch. Barney Ross called that the most potent counterpunch in boxing. Obviously, I don't think Jacoby was looking to land. I don't think he looked at Petrino and said, he's always looping that left hook. I think Petrino just loaded up on something and didn't get there in time. Daniel Marcos versus Adrian Yanez was the fight I was looking forward to. I said I needed to see Marcos pass the Yanez test. I didn't need to see Yanez pass the Marcos test. Because Marcos is a interesting striker. I've enjoyed watching him come up, but then there's also been moments where I've been like, oh, might not be as good as advertised. So I saw someone say he's got the sketchiest undefeated record since Renat. But he got a split decision win over Davey Grant that he probably shouldn't have. But, he's a good varied striker and he's very mechanically slick and he makes good reads in the fight that you can see. And Yanez he had a great come up because it kind of helped that he was in the Jorge Masvidal period where everyone was hot on Masvidal. And people were calling him the next Jorge Masvidal because he has a nice upright stance. He uses his boxing well. He has that light lead leg a lot of the time. And he just sort of like hit a wall with... I don't think anyone expected him to lose to Rob Font, but he did. And then, he just hasn't been the meteoric rise, as Mike Goldberg would say, that everyone expected. But I thought he'd be a good test for Marcos. And Yeah, he was. There were some good moments where early on Yanez was trying to use his low kick to set up stepping in with 1-2s. So, get the guy checking and then step in with a 1-2 when he's on one leg. And Marcos was hitting him every time after Yanez landed the 2. So then Yanez's corner between rounds 1 and 2 asked him to try and hit on the exit or to exit and throw the left hook afterwards. So he did a 1-2 and a weave into the left hook, which is a great sidestep / counterpunch. And Marcos just ate it on the chin. It was a really good connection because Marcos was throwing back after the 1-2. And then the corner were asking him to try and hit Marcos as he was leaning. And then Marcos stopped leaning as soon as he saw that was happening. So that was good. And that's the sort of thing I was talking about with Reeds. Like, Marcos realized that Yanez was trying to uppercut him while he was leaning. So he went to the lean less. And with really good strikers, that means that other stuff opens up. If the guy's not going to lean anymore. I mean, a really good example is Ross Pearson, who was phenomenal at slipping to his left and coming back with the left hook. Had great head movement for MMA. So guys started throwing like high kicks and knees at him, or middle kicks and knees at him. And he was like, I don't want to duck onto that and lose all my teeth. So he'd stop slipping. And then suddenly that really potent counterpunch is off the table and you could start hitting him with jabs and right straights that he would have slipped before because he's choosing not to slip. So yeah, there was lots of interesting stuff like that in this matchup. There was the groin strike to eye poke, which was annoying. I think a lot of people felt like Yanez blew it because in the last round, Marcos was clearly tired and he was circling along the cage. He was stuck in a ring position that, like, if you watch his other fights, he does not get caught in that much because it's not good ring position. Good strikers don't put their back foot to the fence and just stay there for long periods. And he's like jogging along the fence, clearly quite tired. Yanez is moving up to him every time, like catching up to him and standing there ready to start punching. But I got the sense, maybe Yanez was tired and poker facing it really well, but I got the sense Yanez was worried about getting tied up when he stepped in to punch. Because if you remember Yanez versus Randy Costa, he has a really hard time in the first round, and then he goes, this guy's getting a bit tired, I'm going to corner him and hit the body. And that's like the end of the fight. As soon as he starts hitting the body, Costa just folds. Or starts to crumble. It wasn't like the first time he hit him in the body. It was like it just snowballed very quickly. And had he been moving in and hitting Marcos's body along the fence, I think he could have done some real... maybe might have even winded him and got a good visual at the end there of almost stopping him. But instead he just sort of hung back. And then eventually he sort of gave up and entered the clinch on his own terms. And the commentators were losing their minds. So he sort of gave the fight away. I mean, I don't know if he would have won if he'd poured it on then, but certainly he can't argue with the decision when he didn't pour it on, when he had the chance at Marcos, who was just not throwing back. Michael Johnson knocked out Otman Azaitar, which was, this sort of completes Otman Azaitar's collapse because he's on a 3-fight losing streak, all by stoppage now, all by strikes. And Johnson did a good job. I always talk about Johnson as a guy who has a very basic set of skills, but is very good at moving the sliders to what is appropriate for the opponent. Not a whole heap of low kicking or anything like that in this fight. He does love his low kicking, but he wasn't really doing it much. But he was reaching for the leg. There was a really nice entry he did where he reached down. He's southpaw versus an orthodox fighter, or he was southpaw versus orthodox in this instance. He reaches down with his lead hand to grab behind the lead knee, moves his head offline to the outside, and then steps through and tries to grab the other leg for a double leg. I really like that. Just a standing double leg from striking distance. But by doing that, he could then level change and come up with right hooks or level change and come up with left straights, and that's what his corner were calling for. And I believe that's how he got him in the end. But yeah, it was a good right hook. The southpaw right hook, obviously, always a nightmare, especially if you're fighting orthodox. Great to see Michael Johnson. This is the thing. Michael Johnson, he's certainly past his best. He's past his prime. But the wonderful thing about fighting, just to give something back to all the people that are upset by saying that everyone Buckley fought this year was washed except the giant Uzbekistani. The wonderful thing about fighting is that you can have a prime physically, and then you can have a prime technically and tactically. There are fighters who've been at their best performance-wise long after what should have been their best physically. So Anderson Silva's a great one because he came into the UFC quite old for an athlete, and he just got better and better and better until he didn't. But he was one of those guys with a very late career prime that didn't match up to where his athletic prime would have been. In the same way that, because fighting is such a punishing sport, it can make you an old man well before your time. So we can, I'll say things like Vicente Luque's old, Max Holloway's old. They are not old men. They're not old men even in the UFC. Like Max Holloway's like 32, I think. Vicente Luque's 33. The one that I always remember is Big Nog, because he had so many wars. He turned up in the UFC as an old shambling man, and he couldn't get away from punches, and he was just getting stops left and right. And then you looked at his age, and he's like 33. But he's had so many fights, so many great fights and great wars, because he started so young, and he took so many fights. So age in fighting can refer to like fighting age as opposed to like a real age. Shop wornness or wear and tear. Joel Alvarez versus Drakkar Klose. This actually was banger. I love Joel Alvarez. I find him fantastic fun because he's a tall, skinny beanpole guy, but he doesn't fight in a way that's like, I'm going to make use of this height and reach. He does in a way, because using knees and elbows and things against shorter opponents and backing them up and hammering them like that is a way of using your height and reach to really beat someone up, but it's not making use of like the area where you can poke them with jabs, but they can't poke you, which is what most people think of when they think of fighting tall. Joel Alvarez does put himself in danger. What I really liked was he starts moving close towards the fence. Really good ring cutter. If you saw his fight with, who was he smashing with those elbows? Might have been Moises, where he was just hammering him with right hooks and right elbows as Moises circled into it. But yeah, he puts people on the fence. And what I loved was that he didn't rush. He put Klose on the fence and he went body jab. And they moved along the fence a bit. And then he came in and he went jab right straight to the body. So he's already working the body. He's trying to bring the hands down. He's saying, I'm not just going to swing for your head. You're not going to just like duck into my chest and grab underhooks. And then the next time he comes in, he waves his left hand a little bit wide, slaps Klose's right hand so that it's up in a guard, and then shoots the right straight down the center and stuns him. Got taken down, immediately moved to the fence and got up, which is a big improvement on what he was able to do against Arman Tsarukyan. He sort of got stuck there and just elbowed to death. Went right back to work and got the stoppage. And then Sean Woodson versus Fernando Padilla. I called this body horror the fight because it's two 6 foot, well, 1 6'1", 1 6'3" featherweight. So they look bizarre. And Padilla, like, he kept running in and then falling over. Everything that happened, like if he threw a kick and it went wrong, he'd fall over. If he threw a knee and missed, he'd fall over. And I think he's one of those guys who's probably too comfortable off his back, which is something, it should have died a while ago. But it was sad no Joe Rogan on commentary for this one, because this was the first fight in forever that someone has used, not just used rubber guard, but actually used it pretty well. When you're pulling your own feet up like that with your hands from closed guard, that's rubber guard. For a long time, Rogan trained with Eddie Bravo. Eddie Bravo is basically, there's been a couple of guys who've done it at high level in grappling, and Bravo basically invented it. There are guys who use bits of it, like Drysdale used to, Vinny McAleish used to, and he did some in the UFC even. Ben Saunders is like the guy who did it in the UFC well. But Eddie Bravo was trying to create this guard system that was all clinching, because so many guys come from gi jiu-jitsu and then they lose the grips and it's not pushing and pulling, it should be clinching and holding. And so the rubber guard was an attempt to do that and prevent striking. And if you do it well, it does do that. It's just that it also destroys your knees and back, because Eddie Bravo himself has had like 4 back surgeries and 4 knee surgeries. But Padilla did decently here, getting up into an omoplata and threatening Woodson. Mikey Musumeci actually even used the meat hook, which is a part of the rubber guard. And Carlos Condit also used to use that really well, which is where you pass your leg over their back, but you then hook it with the crook of your same side elbow, and then you put that hand in front of their shoulder, which is a terrible description, but look up meat hook triangle on YouTube. And it can work pretty well, actually. Both those guys, like Mikey did it to Jared Brooks in their grappling match, because Jared Brooks was just burying his head in Mikey's chest, and Mikey couldn't get him to posture up for the spinning on the legs. And Carlos Condit did it a ton, because in MMA he was so easy to take down. He literally was one of those guys who was like, I'm just so good off my back, I don't have to care. But what I liked about this finish was Woodson hit him with a couple of punches from orthodox. Padilla sort of stumbled out towards Woodson's right, and Woodson stepped out with his right foot into the southpaw and just followed up with punches from there. You've got to be able to do that. It seems like the more training people get, the less they're inclined to do that. Just follow the guy into the stance that's easiest and work from there. MMA, of course, like now everyone is most people are pretty capable of working to some extent from both stances. But being able to do that is a really powerful help. Great example from boxing would be George Foreman versus Ken Norton. He hurts him in an orthodox exchange, and Norton circles off to Foreman's right, and Foreman steps out with his right foot and clubs him with a right uppercut and a right hook from southpaw. Anything else good on that card? Davy Grant, my boy. Another 18-month layoff. Apparently this one was really serious. I didn't actually check beforehand, before I started joking about his layoffs on Twitter. But he had a really bad neck injury that he thought was the end of his career. So I'm really glad it wasn't, because Davy Grant is fantastic fun. He just turns up once a year, slaps someone who's half his age, sometimes loses a split decision, but he's just brilliant. He's a combination of smooth and jerky, which is really impressive. So he throws constantly with that wide right to the body, or wide right to the head even, where his arm's almost straight out to the side and he's throwing this weird long hook. And it looks slow as hell and like everyone should be able to get away from it. But then it keeps landing. And this fight, he was fighting Tavares, who's a southpaw. And every time Tavares threw his left straight, Grant would just fade slightly, let this left straight basically brush his left ear, and then he'd come back with the right hook to the body and a combination. And it really wore Tavares down. Just the constant coming back in combination, hitting the body with both the right front kick, the right round kick, the left side kick, the left teep, and the right hook constantly to the body. And I think the really great thing about Grant is the variety is constant. So many, even good strikers, once you work out the one or two things they do and you're looking to counter them, they get a bit lost or they get really easy to hit. Davy Grant does so many things and he goes between them constantly. That yes, he throws that wide right to the body a lot, but every time you think that's coming, it might be a side kick to the chest. It might be a jab. It might be a jab and pull. It might be a right low kick. It might be he's constantly doing a dozen different things, where a lot of fighters do 2 or 3 things, or they do 2 or 3 big things and then everything else is just to sort of distract. The spinning back fist. Davy Grant, he threw about 4 spinning back fists in this fight, and it's easy to forget even as a viewer because he was doing so much in between. Thought he looked sensational. He's a great talent. The idea of a Davy Grant title shot is so far beyond the pale now because it's just, he's 38 years old, born in 1985, bloody hell. He's 38 years old. He's having a really hard time staying healthy. He's always had a hard time staying healthy. He's been in the UFC 11 years and he's had 13 fights. He's always awesome. He's always brilliant to watch, and he can beat some of the best guys in the world on their best day. Like Jonathan Martinez, he smoked him. Knocked him out in the 3rd round. Jonathan Martinez went on to recover his momentum and continue being hyped as a prospect because he fought a load of times in the meantime while Davy Grant has really struggled. But just in this last card of the year where we're just sort of winding down, I was thinking about doing some stuff about the stuff I'm grateful for this year in MMA and in fighting generally. Not a Thanksgiving thing because we don't have that over here, but sort of that. But Davy Grant being on this card is the perfect example of that because he's someone I will always, if I see him on the card, go, oh, wow, Davy Grant. How did I not hear about this, firstly? Just buried in the middle of a random card. But also, he's always worth watching. It always brings something weird. There is no one like Davy Grant. And even if he's never the best guy in the world, even if he never reaches the highest of highs, and in maybe 10 years, no one really talks about Davy Grant. I mean, it happens that the best guys in the world, no one talks about them in 15 years in MMA anymore. But right now, and anytime I go back and remember him, Davy Grant has given me an awful lot of joy in this sport. So anyway, I think that's a good note to end on. It was a pretty good year in the UFC. It certainly picked up after the mid-year mark. First sort of 4 months were pretty hard, UFC schedule-wise this year. Luckily, that big Abu Dhabi card next year is booked for January. You got Islam versus Arman, and you got Merab versus Umar. So yeah, brilliant. Let's start things off right this year. And of course, all the other stuff that we watched this year, loads of kickboxing, lots of boxing, all the stuff that I've been trying to cover extracurricularly because the UFC did get a bit complacent and has been a bit complacent generally with its scheduling and the quality of the fights it's putting on. But all in all, not a bad year of fighting. So yeah, I'm going to do the Slacky Awards probably at the start of January. If you have nominations for the Buttwire Award for Worst Game Plan, the Technical Turnaround for Most Improved Fighter, the Game Plan of the Year, is there a fourth one I do? Well, those three. If you got nominations for any of those three, leave them in the comments or tweet them at me. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Go read the Cub Swanson piece I wrote on the Patreon. Support the podcast, be a boy, and I'll catch you next week. Cub Swanson defying his wife, bless.